I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
One of the films in my top 10 best of list is about an ancient war between immortals who fight each other with swords and are only killed by chopping their freaking heads off. I of course am talking about the 1986 classic fantasy adventure, Highlander. It is a film that has had a huge impact on my life. My fondest memories with friends growing up involved Highlander. We would always watch it during sleepovers, so much so that we could recite the entire film line by line. When we all got our first jobs, the first thing we bought from our first ever paycheck was a Connor MacLeod replica katana. In our local community college, it was not uncommon to see a random student walking down campus with a brown trench coat and a katana strapped to their back. Upon its release in 1986, Highlander did not do very well, only grossing $5.9 million in the US and $12.9 million internationally against a budget of $19 million. But when it was released on home video, that's when it became a hit, and sparked an entire generation of wannabe immortals like myself. If you do not know what Highlander is, then go watch it immediately, because you are truly denying yourself an amazing experience. To sum up the plot of this film, it's the story of a 400-year-old immortal from the Scottish Highlands named Connor MacLeod, who in the year 1536 is killed by the evil immortal, the Kurgan, and awakens a day later to learn that he is now tied to an ancient war where he and his fellow immortals fight each other to the death. Their final battle will earn the last immortal the mysterious prize, leaving the winner to state the eternal motto of the immortals.
There can be only one.
It's one of those movies that has the trifecta of compelling characters, great action, and quotable dialogue, and concludes with a solid ending that does not set up a universe or further sequels. I mean, the climactic line is that there can be only one. How can you make a sequel out of that? Well, sadly they tried, and it's been a disaster every time. I have seen the theatrical cut, the Renegade cut, and the special edition cut of Highlander 2. I have seen Highlander 3, The Sorcerer, aka The Final Dimension, and the animated series, in addition to the 2 sequels that tried to merge these films with the TV show that we are going to talk about today, Highlander the series. The Highlander series is one of those few shows that's based on a movie which has a deep mythology which actually works. I think the reason why is because it does not try to continue the story past the original film, but instead explores it and creates its own identity. If you watch the Highlander series, you'll surely agree with my assessment, as the series lasted 6 seasons and delivered some incredible quality. Frankly, it wasn't perfect, but I don't think any show is perfect. What matters is that it had far more great episodes than bad ones. Maybe you folks out there think I'm exaggerating. Is the show not as good as I'm building it up to be? Can there be more than one? Well, let us find out in this episode of Gone, but Not Forgotten. Highlander the series ran from October 3rd, 1992 to May 16th, 1998, and its origins are quite interesting. After the disaster that was Highlander 2, producers Peter Davis and Bill Panzer began to toy around with the idea of making a TV show out of the property. Christopher Lambert, the star of the movies, knew that they were interested in a Highlander series, and introduced them to Christian Charest, the president of France's leading entertainment conglomerate, Gaumont. Charest knew of the strong potential that the series had to become a hit, so he had the Gaumont television division buy the rights to the show. The original direction of the Highlander series was very different from what we wound up with. Originally, it was set to focus on Connor MacLeod's adventures leading up to the Gathering. The showrunners began casting for an actor to take over the role of Connor MacLeod. Over 400 actors were screened, and actor Derek DeLint won the role. But for reasons still unknown, DeLint left the production. So the producers hired the first actor they screened, Adrian Paul. At first, Paul was a hard sell. He was still a virtual unknown, only previously having small roles on TV. I first saw him in a cult film with Sandra Bullock called Love Potion No. 9, where he had a very funny scene with Bullock. Eventually, the investors changed their minds because they knew that Paul would be appealing to both men and women. During this whole process, Christopher Lambert said that he wanted to appear in one episode. It was Adrian's idea to make the show about a new MacLeod that would allow Lambert to reprise the role of Connor. Adrian Paul was happy that the producers went with his idea, because he was not comfortable playing such an iconic character, and he knew fans would hate it. In the pilot episode, you can totally tell that Duncan was supposed to be Connor. He also owned an antique store and fought a Kurgan wannabe, played by Bull from Night Court. Even his origin story is exactly that of Connor's, so they eventually fleshed out Duncan's backstory a bit more, which helped separate his character from Connor. It was clear as the series went on that Duncan was an entirely unique character. Plus, I'm sure he would look better in white sneakers. It's so funny that I've never noticed how stupid those sneakers make Christopher Lambert look. Another difference between Connor and Duncan was that Duncan was more sociable than Connor. In the movies, Connor is a loner who is quiet and brooding. Duncan, however, has friends, relationships, and even mentors a young kid named Richie, played by the late Stan Kirsch. It was through Richie that any viewer who was unfamiliar with the films learned about the Highlander universe. And his character had an interesting arc throughout the series. He started out as an annoying brat who was more of a pain in the ass to Duncan instead of a partner. But eventually he matured and learned to be a formidable opponent to other immortals. And his relationship to Duncan was complex. Even though he was his student, he would argue with Duncan on how to deal with his new life as an immortal. They wound up at odds for many episodes, and even parted ways from time to time. And this is what I loved about the show. Its complex characters with interesting backstories. The world of the Highlander was also explored further, such as introducing the idea of dark and light quickenings. The quickening is the energy that an immortal absorbs from killing another immortal. In the films, it's just an energy source that empowers the winning immortal to enhance their abilities. But in the show, it was the knowledge and the soul of the fallen immortal that gets absorbed. So there was a danger of an immortal becoming evil after he kills a murderous opponent. And there was also the opposite of an evil and cruel immortal being turned to the light after killing a noble enemy. Personality traits were also a side effect of the quickening, and quickenings would not occur if it was a human who killed the immortal. The first season of the show was a bit of a mess, as it was pretty formulaic. Adrian Paul said that he felt the show was dying during the first season, because of how it followed the bad guy of the week format. He said that it wasn't until David Abramowitz took over as head writer for season 2 that the show took a drastic turn for the better. Abramowitz said that when he was a producer during the first season, it was all about survival. By the 7th episode of season 1, multiple showrunners and producers had either quit or been fired. When David took over, they were behind on production. Multiple scripts had to be either rewritten or scrapped entirely. The worst part of it was that the studio had sold the show to dozens of different countries in different ways. The French were expecting a superhero show with a sword. Germany was expecting a sword and sorcery show, and Japan thought that they were getting a show with rock stars. Abramowitz was constantly juggling things to help the show survive. By season 2, he had had enough, and just focused on making a show with character-driven stories. You can see his new direction take over with the introduction of the Watchers in the first episode of season 2. The Watchers greatly influenced the show and the entire Highlander universe. They were an ancient organization tasked with documenting the history of immortals. It's through them that the concepts of immortals and holy ground were fully fleshed out. During the show, it was established that immortals weren't allowed to fight not just other immortals on holy ground, but human beings as well. One of the Watchers even says that there is a legend that 2 immortals who fought in a holy temple was what caused the Pompeii disaster. The special effects on this show were also fairly impressive, especially the quickenings. There were a lot of practical explosion effects as well as computer ones to show the effects of the lightning during the Quickening, although sometimes an immortal would get a little too excited about winning a duel. Wow, Duncan, maybe you should think about baseball while you quicken. I hear it helps. Not that I would know anything about that. The other aspect of the show that many people point out are the amazing sword fights throughout the series. And there's a reason for that. Bob Anderson, the show's fight choreographer, was the man behind some of your favorite sword fights on film and TV. He started his movie career coaching Errol Flynn and went on to be responsible for the sword fights in The Princess Bride, multiple James Bond movies, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and even did all the lightsaber fights as Darth Vader in the original Star Wars movies. Of course, you can't have Highlander without the amazing music from Queen. I became a fan of the legendary British rock band because of Highlander. Although after I heard the entirety of Princes of the Universe, I learned that not every one of their songs was perfect. Most people have only heard this theme song from its shortened version in the Highlander movie and show, so go and listen to the entirety of the song and you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry, I know a lot of Queen fans will disagree with me, but I think that song goes off the rails about a minute in, though it has grown on me over time. And the rest of the score in the series was also very good, being composed by Roger Bellin, who even went on to create a Celtic opera based off of Highlander. One of the most notable characters from the series was the immortal Amanda, played by Elizabeth Grayson, and she was awesome. Amanda was a 1200-year-old immortal thief, kind of like the Catwoman to Duncan's Batman. She always had a scheme up her sleeve, but deep down she had a heart of gold. It was Grayson and Paul's chemistry together that sold her to the fans. They would always have great interactions, with Amanda tending to always cause Duncan problems. Another character introduced in the series was Joe Dawson, played by the immensely talented Jim Burns. Dawson was Duncan's watcher, assigned to follow and document MacLeod's adventures. Dawson admired Duncan, as he saw him as an honorable immortal who was not corrupted by the game. Joe was a fan favorite, and I think without Joe, this series wouldn't have been nearly as good. Originally, the actor who was almost cast was Michael York. No offense to Mr. York, I loved him in Logan's Run, but I think his casting would have been a mistake. He would have been one of those librarian types, a one-dimensional character. The Joe that we got went against the grain. He was a veteran, who also happened to be disabled, losing both his legs in the war and struggling with his loyalty to the Watchers, as well as his friendship with Duncan. Jim Burns also happened to be a disabled veteran as well, and the writers used his real-life experiences to help develop the character of Joe. They also incorporated Jim Burns' music into the show, as he happens to be an accomplished blues musician. Finally, the most popular character on the show, and in my opinion the entire franchise, was Methos. Methos was the oldest immortal at 5,000 years old. He was played by Peter Wingfield, but Ron Perlman was almost cast in the role, which is funny because Perlman would guest star in an episode of Highlander as an immortal who pretended to be Methos. It's easy to see why Methos was so popular. He was sarcastic and had an interesting backstory. To avoid other immortals, Methos created a new identity for himself as Adam Pearson, and became a Watcher to study, well, himself. And that was such a clever idea. He becomes a Watcher to study the legendary Methos so that he can protect himself from danger. He also had a huge heart, much to Methos' regret, and this is tragically shown when he falls in love with a woman who is revealed to be dying, which winds up with Methos sitting by her side as she dies in the hospital. Two of my favorite episodes of the series, which feature great action and awesome character moments, are the episodes Comes a Horseman and Revelation 6:8, where we delve into the past of Methos. It's revealed that during the Bronze Age, Methos was a member of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Death, who indeed brought death and destruction to thousands of innocents. It surprised me, as back then I had never seen such deep characterization on a show like this. It made me see how people can be evil but turn good, or vice versa. As for my personal worst episodes, well, that would be pretty much most of Season 6. You see, the show was supposed to end in Season 5, but the producers wanted to make a spin-off show, so the series was extended for another season. And that 6th season was hot garbage, as it was just a testing ground for backdoor pilots. There were 1 or 2 good episodes in the season, such as a favorite of mine called Diplomatic Immunity, which involves an immortal con man and his mortal wife trying to scam somebody and things going horribly wrong. By the end of Season 6, it had been decided that Amanda would be the one who got her own show, called Highlander The Raven, which sadly lasted 1 season. I cannot comment on its quality as I have never seen it, but the fan consensus is that it sucked. After the Highlander series ended, it was established that it was not a prequel, but rather an alternate continuity where the gathering had not occurred and Connor did not win the prize. This brings us to the movies. Oh, those movies. Those horrible, horrible movies. The curse of the Highlander sequels lived on with Highlander Endgame in 2000, a movie that had Connor giving up his life so that Duncan could gain all of his power. Then they followed it up with an even worse attempt at continuing the franchise, the direct-to-Sci-Fi Channel movie The Source in 2007, where they again try to attempt to hint at the origin of the Immortals. In my opinion, this was always a mistake for the franchise, mostly because they always overcomplicate things. Whether they're aliens, time-traveling prisoners, and worse idea upon worse idea. Personally, if I had to write an origin story, I would say that they were changelings. If you folks don't know what changelings are, they're basically children who have been replaced by fairies. I mean, it does fit, because in the original movies, the Immortals are in touch with nature. And in the series, it's revealed that they always start out as abandoned babies. Look, I don't know. It makes more sense than them being fucking aliens from the planet Zeist. As for the show's cast, they are thankfully still working today. Adrian Paul has gone on to appear in Arrow, among other shows. Although his biggest accomplishment was not in acting, but in founding a charity called the Peace Fund, which is dedicated to the worldwide improvement of the living, educational, and health conditions of children over the world. Elizabeth Grayson is on an audio series called Suspense that you can find on YouTube. Peter Wingfield also founded another charity for the health of children called Project Eden. Surprisingly, in 2011, he decided to semi-retire from acting and go to medical school, which has led to him serving as an anesthesiologist at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. Jim Burns is probably the most active of the Highlander cast, as he continues to work on TV, film, and animation projects. He is also still performing music, with his last album, Long Hot Summer Days, dropping in 2017. As for Stan Kirsch, he wound up working in a few more roles after Highlander, one of the most notable being the voice for Robot on the Invincible motion comic series that was aired on MTV. After that, he became an acting teacher, who by all accounts was loved by his students. Many of his students attribute their career to being guided by Stan's experience in television and film, but tragically, on January 11th, 2020, Kirsch took his own life. And he has left the world deprived of the light that he brought to the people who knew him and his fans. If any of you folks or somebody you know is considering suicide, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, or text STRENGTH to the crisis text line at 741-741, or visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. We assure you that help is less than a minute away. So what does the future hold for the Highlander franchise? Well, a reboot. Of course.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
Yeah, I don't like it either. Since 2008, there has been talk of a Highlander reboot, with such stars attached as Ryan Reynolds.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
This just in, Highlander the series is now available to watch for free on IMDb TV. We apologize for forgetting to mention this earlier in the episode, and now return you back to your regularly scheduled programming. Seriously, Ryan Reynolds? That's just more than stupid. Recently, Henry Cavill has been rumored to be in the lead to play Connor MacLeod. If I had to pick somebody who would play Connor though, I would pick Kevin McKidd. If any of you folks ever saw Journeyman, you will agree with me that he's an amazing actor. Plus, like the character, he's actually freaking Scottish. Regardless of what the future holds, Highlander will always be one of those incredible films that will be etched in the history of science fiction and fantasy film. But with all the reboots and sequels that have been made and failed, this amazing series has proven to us that there can indeed be more than one.
This thing called love, I just can't handle it. This thing called love, I must get around to it. I ain't ready. Crazy little thing called love. This thing called love, it cries in a cradle all night. It swings, it jives, it shakes all over like a jellyfish. I kinda like it. Crazy little thing called love.
I'm Jesse Shade, speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for JoBlo.com, and thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company that appreciates all of your support, and we will see you next time for the next installment of Gone But Not Forgotten.